Not quite. Now we know it's in progress. And I'm also enabling the auto transcription, so you can see the words that I'm articulating as they are articulated. So everybody, welcome to the University of the Underground Moon Arkestra Whistleblowing Program. I am Dr. Aditi Jagannathan, so the head of this amazing program, and I find it's always quite hard to describe yourself and to summarize yourself in a couple of words or sentences, but I shall endeavor. I'm an educator, a dreamer, a writer, and I'm here to help you all think through the notion of whistleblowing with care, compassion, and love. And it's an honor to be heading this incredible program, to be in space and time and spirit with you all, and also to be part of the University of the Underground, which is like one of the most amazing educational learning spaces. So just to give you a bit of context, the University of the Underground was founded in February 2017 as a charity, and it's an amazing, incredible, free, pluralistic, transnational, decolonial university that originally was conceived of in the basement of nightclubs. So we're all radical, subterranean, clandestine people in this space. And in this particular specific 2-month residency program, we're calling for an investigation into whistleblowing. We want to look at whistleblowing through a kind of multi-dimensional prism as a political action, but also as a literal instrument and a metaphysical instrument, as something that kind of beckons a dialogue, and also as something that kind of invites a different method of communication. So, without further ado, we have the honor of having the absolutely incredible Vishal Kumaraswamy with us. Vishal is an incredible artist and curator based in Bangalore in southern India. And he works across text, film, sound, performance, and computational arts. His work draws from his own subaltern caste lineage and investigates a range of critical concerns around language, identity, and the body. So he often employs emergent and experimental technologies to create media-based works within physical and hybrid formats. And I'm so excited to hear the worlds that Vishal is going to unfurl with us today. So Vishal, greetings, blessings, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Algi. Thank you for having me. Nice to see everyone. I'm not particularly sure what everybody's practices are like, but I'm just gonna quickly give you a small, maybe slightly broader introduction. Let me just figure out how to share my screen here. Oh, I don't think I can share my screen yet. Okay, yeah. Okay, so everyone can see this, right? Okay, cool. Like Algi said, my name is Vishal Kumaraswamy. I'm based in Bangalore. I was also told to give a visual description of myself. I have dark brown hair and light brown skin. I'm wearing a dark gray t-shirt, and I'm calling in from my studio in Bangalore, which is actually just a room in my house. So I'm not going too deep into this title. Is super daunting, but I'm not particularly going very deep into it. I'm looking at it more as a way of relating some of the elements with both the history and the contemporary sort of experience of caste in South Asia, particularly kind of restricted to South India, where I'm from. especially as you may or may not know, but India has two very distinct populations. We have the North Indian kind of population that has a lot of mixed DNA due to the Aryan migration. And then we have what is now somewhat being found out as indigenous population, which is who are called the Dravidians, who are basically based in South India and everything below Mumbai, basically. So I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a maybe introduction to how caste kind of comes into my practice, both from my own lived experience, but also how I bring caste or the culture of caste-based art forms into my practice. And today I'm just only talking about the sound aspect of it. Okay, so you can actually see this. So I don't think I should read, maybe I should read it, I don't know. So before this, before as an artist, I was freelancing as a live music photographer slash filmmaker, documentary photographer, filmmaker. I was very disillusioned with it. Working with music was good, but it doesn't pay in India. And before that, I used to be a banker for a few years, but all of those stages was kind of faced with a sense of deep alienation of possessing a certain kind of marginalized identity and not finding other people like yourself in those spaces, and then constantly having to negotiate. Within the documentary world, the ideas around white, imperial, upper caste gaze, within photography and filmmaking. And then before that in banking, just the idea that there were very, very, very few people of my community around me. And for a very long time, I didn't particularly understand why I was feeling alienated, because I am second generation. That means my father left the caste ghetto and moved to an urban environment. So I grew up in a city, I grew up in Bangalore without any ties to my community. And this kind of is now coming back up in my practice as ways of me finding or sort of having cartographic journeys back into where my community is based, but also using different ways of getting there, using sound, using some visual culture and histories and traditions. A lot of it is oral history, because there is very little documented history of my community, even to today. So maybe I should read it out. So within my practice, I move between gestural and conversational research, critical theory, literature, news media, and caste realities. Over the last 3 years, I've been working on developing sort of a critical pedagogical framework. It's called Subaltern Futurism. I recently got a grant for it. I'm now making it into a website that will be open access. But subaltern futurism basically is built on this premise that the idea of subaltern in post-colonial studies is hinged like pretty predominantly of upper caste post-colonial scholars who have very kind of cleverly not put out their own caste positions and how they are complicit in the caste system today. And the idea of kind of using the term subaltern is to reclaim it, but also to say that the idea of futurism for subalterns doesn't exist, because the today is already difficult to imagine. So how can you imagine a tomorrow without first acknowledging the fact that the term no longer belongs to you? So the framework is basically kind of a way of like breaking open some of those conversations between ideas around sort of this pre-post-colonial thinking, and then also contextualizing it to subaltern communities within South Asia, the diaspora, but also ideas around like half caste and basically people who are mixed caste and mixed locations, and people whose entire histories have been erased, particularly within the, I guess it's the Atlantic region with Fiji and everywhere else. But maybe I'm wrong, the ocean might be wrong. But the idea of erasure and how do you reclaim histories that you don't know were present. So it kind of came from that impulse, or histories that you don't know are present and you don't know where they are. So it kind of came from that impulse, and it's to also see how you can use technology to create newer narratives, but also allow for the creation of spaces where these conversations can happen and surfaces upon which interactions can unfold between both like historical knowledge, contemporary knowledge, but also to have this bridge between communities based in different geographies. But one specific area of concern for subaltern futurism is how do you employ technology, seeing as I'm based in Bangalore and technology is all around me, how do you use technology in ways that makes knowledge accessible, but also the production and dissemination of knowledge as easy as possible without getting enmeshed in the larger sort of neoliberal capitalist narratives about technology. So just a background of what the caste system is, if people don't, whoever is not familiar with it. It's kind of based off of a book, and it's basically a very harmful mythological tale. But it looks a bit like this pyramid. This the image in the slide is a triangle shaped like a pyramid, and it's broken down into four specific categories of caste. So the Brahmins, who are supposed to be the top of the hierarchy, historically have been priests. Also, right now are also priests. A lot of them in contemporary sort of culture are still priests. And then below them come the rulers, the warriors, the kings, the kshatriyas, and then the vaishyas, which is your specific occupational based castes. But the occupations are still what is considered as clean occupations that do not involve any sort of interaction with bodies, bodily fluids, or basically just above the scale of purity. And then there's the Shudras, who are like the caste that perform the most amount of manual labor. So your farmers, your manual construction workers and things like that, what historically was servants and what was called unskilled workers. And outside of the caste system lie the Dalits, who are the untouchables. This is a community that I belong to, historically have been relegated to the dirtiest of the dirty jobs, which is literally how they are termed. So there's a lot of like skinning, cowhide, leather based things, cleaning of human animal waste, dealing with dead bodies, but essentially tasked with the labor of purifying the world for those in the Varna system. And the Varna is basically the four categories of upper caste, or basically, forward caste. We use different terms post-independence because now we have schedules of castes. If I'm going too fast, please just ask me to slow down. So this is just a very, very brief overview of the caste system. And this is some of the terms that I'll be using as I'm kind of just talking a little bit about my practice. So we use Dalit both as a way of reclaiming the term. The term also comes from, I think, still Buddhist, a Buddhist Pali text. It says broken people, broken man, but sometimes called untouchables. Then we have a schedule of castes that came just before the British left South Asia, which was divided based off of occupations, but it was also divided based off of hearsay. It's not entirely, there is no historical evidence for how the schedule was drawn up. And there's a lot of discrepancies in how the schedule shows up, because you could be a particular caste and occupy a particular position in a certain region, but you could go 50 or 100 kilometers in a different direction, and you might be playing the role, let's say, of an oppressor, or you might be higher up in the hierarchy. A lot of anti-caste literature scholars, right from Dr. Ambedkar, who was the preeminent scholar, and who also wrote the Constitution of India, use the term Bahujan, which also comes from like Buddhist Pali. Bahujan literally means the many, or the majority, or many people. Now in contemporary sort of anti-caste movement and literature, we tend to use three terms. We use Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi. Adivasi are the indigenous tribal populations of South Asia. We use all three because it is left open for people who possess those identities to assert themselves using the terms that they feel comfortable in. While Bahujan was kind of formulated to address all marginalized groups, there has been resistance for certain people who don't want to use the term within even communities like mine, who want to continue using Dalit as a way of reclaiming the term for ourselves. I use the term subaltern sometimes. I'm also using it as like a way of speculating solidarities between marginalized populations across the global South. And you see a little bit of this in the works that I'm going to talk about today. But I'm also within Subaltern Futures and the website that I'm building, it's also meant to kind of have space for conversations in that the notion or the nature of subalternity, while historically through Antonio Gramsci came from post-colonial populations, that the effects of colonization are continuous. They didn't really stop after these countries or these regions got independence or became independent. And in South Asia specifically, I use the term subaltern as a way of also kind of alluding a little bit to the fact that colonialism in South Asia would not have been possible without the caste system. They are hand in glove, and the reason we continue to have the caste system as such a predominant way of governance and the way countries and regions in South Asia are governed is still based off of the caste system. And that was only helped and codified by the British when they were here. So I'm also kind of using subaltern as a way of like saying, hey, there are other tangents and connections to be made with other populations that find themselves in similar conditions as us. I also once in a while might use the term Brahmins or Brahminical within anti-caste movement and literature and just contemporary understanding of caste today. We use Brahminical as a way to signify supremacist ideology in South Asia, particularly because they are the proponents as well as the greatest benefactors of the caste system, continue to hold positions in pretty much every field. This is a little just to kind of give you a sense for what the composition of the country is. This is 11 years old. This is wildly inaccurate because South Asia, particularly South Asia, has a very, very loose grip with facts and figures because it tends to rewrite narratives, particularly in India, it rewrites the narrative of caste. So the minute that the census comes out and says that Bahujans means the many people, we make up the majority of the country, the systems of governance that are built in the country and the ones that actually kind of are supposed to, I guess, practice equality and treat all citizens the same will have to come crumbling down. So this is based off of a census that was done. Its successive governments since 2011 have been very reluctant to conduct an accurate caste census in spite of a large demand from Bahujans, simply because it will completely undo the narrative of the country as a strange kind of homogeneous whole, because we are not, India specifically is not a country, it is an assembly of nations. We are a very loose coalition of states, and there's all the complexities of how the country was formed. But across pretty much all the narratives that concern India, whether it's about language, about culture, caste is kind of the foundation upon which they are built. I also put this table here to kind of dispel the myth that caste is a Hindu problem or a problem that's relegated to one religion, which is not particularly the case. It also kind of undoes a little bit of the conversation about socialism and left politics and communism in the country, because class is a misnomer, considering that caste is based off occupation. So in spite of you can have class politics, but caste is still the thing that determines where you land up in society. You can still have class-based privileges, but in a majority of the spaces that you have to navigate, public and private, what caste you are still dictates how you move through those spaces. So that's also the reason I kind of just put this up. Okay, so now I'm not going to go too much into this, but essentially I'm just going to give a very, very, very brief kind of overview about the kind of musical traditions in South Asia. And I use South Asia and India, like, I don't know, like I interchange them just because, again, like the concept of India, the concept of countries in South Asia and the subcontinent are fairly new, while these traditions have kind of been around for a much longer time. We have two predominant, or like not predominant, dominant, I guess, musical traditions in the country. We have Carnatic, which is, again, it's the Aryan sort of Dravidian divide, which is Carnatic is in the south, is in South India. It comes from my state, the state I'm in right now, Karnataka. It's built, they have some similarities. Both are built off of a system of raga. Ragas are melodic frameworks for improvisation and composition. And tala is rhythm, but they're also, I think, called cyclic metric patterns. But the emphasis in Carnatic music is placed on the voice. And most compositions are written to be sung, and even when they are played on instruments, they are played in a singing style. They are played to accompany the singing, or sometimes mimic the singing, sometimes stand in for the voice. Whereas with Hindustani music, there's kind of an element of improvisation. There's also kind of is reflective of the Islamic influence in North India and what is called as like this idea of like call and playback. I'm forgetting the other term for it, but it's kind of slightly similar to, I guess, some Western traditions where there's the idea of free improvisation in Hindustani music, which is in Carnatic music is a lot more rigid. But what I am going to like refer to a little bit is what the idea of folk and traditional music is within Dalit Bahujan sort of Adivasi traditions, where rhythm is at the center of these practices. Also, because many of the musical traditions in our communities are built around signifying specific events in the communities. So they could be, and they're often a call to gathering. They call for funerals, they call for the gathering for as a celebration of specific events within the communities. And within the subaltern communities, it's also derived from its associations to the social hierarchy of caste. So we have genres like occupational music, funeral music, we have non-Brahminical devotional music. Sometimes we have accompaniments to Brahminical devotional music, where musicians or artists from our communities are still playing music in service of the deities and gods, but they are not allowed to enter the temples or the places of worship. So they are playing it outside, and they're playing it for the people, because majority of the people who are worshiping these gods, considering the caste census and the numbers that we went through, are still members of the subaltern communities, whereas the priests and the upper caste are allowed to go into temples and places of worship. So today, I have my presentation is really small. It's only like 14 slides, but there's a lot of listening. There's a lot of looking at some videos and things like that. So I'm just going to give like one last introduction to like 3 things that you will see in the materials I'm going to share. I don't know why I titled this, but essentially I was trying to talk about the three big states in South India, which is Kerala, Karnataka, and Tamil Nadu, which form, there are 2 more states, actually 2 more states, 2 more union territories, but between these 3 states, there's a lot of exchange of a particular tradition of folk-based community musical traditions. So I want to talk just about two of them today. One is in Karnataka, we have an oral storytelling practice that I'm going to show some examples of. And then in Tamil Nadu, there's a very specific kind of drum, which is now becoming a very, very important political symbol because of how the drum is made and who the communities that use it, and the communities are using it as a way of reclaiming their autonomy in both like contemporary life, but also in the politics of the region today. So the two instruments that are from Karnataka, one is called the Shruti. Shruti also means note, I think, if I remember correctly, or tone, I don't know. But it's essentially a string, it's a very rudimentary stringed instrument. It has a, I should actually just show you the photo of it. Yeah, there we go. That's the Shruti. It's made of usually bamboo stick or sometimes cane. And it's got a very rudimentary drum at the end of it. It's got one string, and it's accompanied by a soft percussive instrument called the chautki. The chautki it's kind of percussive, but it also plays the role of, I guess, punctuating the performance. And the chautki also has kind of a small drum at the end of it. They're both metal drums, and it has like a kind of wooden stick with bells on either sides of it. And the other one that I was talking about that I want to talk about is the parai. Parai is, you might have heard the English word pariah. Pariah comes from this, pariah literally means outcast. And it comes from this community, the parayar. The parayar are the people who play the parai. The parai is one of the most ancient instruments actually in the world. It's been around since the 6th century BC, during the second or third Sangam period. And Sangam is basically classical Tamil kingdoms. And the parai has kind of been around for a very long time. It's a percussive instrument that is used in a variety of ways. Yeah, that's kind of what the parai looks like. It's dried calf hide. And it kind of also varies a little bit from region to region within Tamil Nadu. And it's played with two bamboo sticks. One's a short one, one's a longer one. But I will show you some videos of it. Okay. So I can pause now, and then maybe I should just go to the example of the work that I want to show. Okay. Okay, so there's two examples I'm showing. One is from my region, from Karnataka. It's a folk practice called Yellamana Ata, which literally means Yellama is the deity. It literally means Yellama's play. This example that I'm showing is by a group called the Urban Folk Project. They're friends of mine. The Urban Folk Project it's an initiative to archive folk forms in Karnataka. They use elements of multiple forms to build bodies of work that engage an urban audience with folk art practices. They kind of have had this vision for a while to bring practices that have been forgotten, but were also relegated to rural communities, and to kind of bring them into urban spaces, but also to kind of remind audiences, particularly within Karnataka, that folk is very important, but folk is always contemporary. Folk is not historical. Folk is meant to reflect the signs of times. And what Urban Folk Project is trying to do is to kind of show the like songs and words of artists who are no longer in the popular imaginary. I can play a small excerpt of this, but before that, this Yellamana Ata, the play, Yellama's play, is played using the chautki and the voice. You'll see Shilpa, who is the singer in the video, and her partner Aditya. But the play itself it's a ritualistic overnight play. It's hosted mostly during festivals by lower caste Hindus around parts of Hyderabad, North Karnataka, and southern Maharashtra. It is the story of how Parashurama's mother, Parashurama is the saint within Hindu mythology. His mother Renuka was a Kshatriya woman. She comes to become the goddess Yellamma. So she becomes a powerful deity for the lower caste Hindu Devadasi and Jogati communities. Devadasis are temple courtesans. I don't want to go too much into the history of Devadasis, but and then the Jogati communities are the community of trans women, and Yallamanata is meant to be played. It's quite rigid still, even in rural Karnataka, that it's meant to only be performed by Jogatis. It's only meant to be performed by trans women who embody the spirit of this deity. And because they are deemed to be the disciples of the deity. It's kind of an unwritten rule, but it's very strictly enforced. And even for Shilpa, who's from the community, from the Dalit community that Jogatis belong to, it meant that she always has a Jogati teacher with her, somebody who is performing alongside her in most performances. Right now, they are building a center in North Karnataka, which is a kind of home for the community, where now I think there's 40 performers who are gathering and kind of continuing the practice, but also bringing it into spaces that historically also there's a connotation with what spaces Yallamanata could be played in. Even in rural Karnataka, even till today, even though it's a ritualistic overnight play, it's still played outdoors. They're not really allowed to be played inside the temples. And the myth of Yellamma is believed to have originated in this place called Saudatti in North Karnataka. I'm going to play a small excerpt of this. Please let me know if you can actually hear it. And I'm going to mute my mic in that process.
Vishal, because you're muting your mic, we can't hear it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, 1 second. I think I know what happened. I will share it with sound. There we go.
Beautiful. Thank
you. Walking back home. All the way she's thinking, Jamadagni, he gave me a test. Now that I have passed this test, he's going to love me forever. And what a happily forever it's going to be. She walks home. Jamadagni was obviously not expecting her. He stops. He looks at her. He's shocked. He goes, Renuka? Renuka, ni chamatkari iddi. You're amazing. Ni mayakarti iddi. You're magical. I'm so impressed with you, Renuka, he tells her. I'm so impressed with you, Renuka, that every day you will make me a pot just like this and bring me water for a puja, he says. She says, okay, Swami. And that was Renuka's life. Every day she would wake up in the morning and she would go up and down this mountain and she would sit down on the sandy banks of the river and she would make a pot. She would coax a snake. She would place it on her head. She'd fill the pot of water and she'd bring back Jamadagni, a pot of water carried in a pot of sand, sitting on a holster which is made of snake. Every day. Make the pot, bring water, make the pot, bring water, make the pot, bring water. But then what happened one day? One day, she was on the sandy banks of the river. She's making that pot. Uda, 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 pot is getting made. But across that river, there is a man and a woman, lovers. And they were having a frolicking time. They were touching each other. They were kissing each other. They were hugging each other. And they were having such a good time. Renuka sees this. And her focus on that pot. Focus jar hoitu. The minute she saw them and she started observing them, she was like, that must be love. That must be love. And if that is love, what I have is a mere compromise, she said. And it's a second that that thought appeared to her. For a second. In that second, that pot broke. Yauva koda odit. Igyen herli. She starts praying again. Udha, 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 udha. Wapas bandil re. What am I going to tell Jamadagni? She thinks. She goes back. She's worried. She's breaking her knuckles. And there, Jamadagni has waited for too long for his puja water. He loses it. Renuka! Yashta dhairya ninaga, he says. How dare you disobey me? Nanu misi mana madidini. Get out, he says. Get out of my sight. I am exiling you. Get out of my sight. I am going to banish you to the forest. Like Rama, she's exiled to the forest. She then realizes, ನಾನೇ ಇಷ್ಟಪಟ್ಟು ಮದುವೆಯಾದ ಹುಡುಗ ಈಗ ಅವ ಬಿ ಹೊರಗೆ ಹಾಕ್ಯಾನ ಈಗ ಯಾಕಡೆ ಹೋಗ. ಸೊ ಶೀಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಫಾರೆಸ್ಟ್. ರೇಣುಕಾ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಕುಂತಲ್ಲೇ ಕುಂತಿಲ್ಲ, ನಿಂತಲ್ಲೇ ನಿಂತಿಲ್ಲ ರಾಮ. ಕುಂತಲ್ಲೇ ಕುಂತಿಲ್ಲ, ನಿಂತಲ್ಲೇ ನಿಂತಿಲ್ಲ ರಾಮ. ಹಿಂಗೆ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಹಿಡಿದಾಳ ದಾರಿ ರಾಮರ. ಹಿಂಗೆ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಹಿಡಿದಾಳ ದಾರಿ ರಾಮರ. ಕಾಡು ಸುತ್ತಾಡ್ಯಾಳ, ವಾಡೆ ಸುತ್ತಾಡ್ಯಾಳ ರಾಮ. ಕಾಡು ಸುತ್ತಾಡ್ಯಾಳ, ವಾಡೆ ಸುತ್ತಾಡ್ಯಾಳ ರಾಮ. ಹಿಂಗೆ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಹಿಡಿದಾಳ ದಾರಿ ರಾಮರ. ಹಿಂಗೆ ಯಲ್ಲಮ್ಮ ಹಿಡಿದಾಳ ದಾರಿ ರಾಮರ.
Okay, I'm gonna pause this because it's, I mean, this is the most condensed version of that performance, which is 30 minutes. But even in the condensed version that they do, it's about 4 hours or so. But so, I mean, this is kind of, I guess, a hybrid version of what actually happens in Yallamanata. Shilpa has been documenting and collecting the stories for, I don't even know how long, maybe 5 years or so. And because it's all based off of oral history and the traditions are very much oral folk storytelling practices, they are now trying also to build the archive from which I guess more people from the communities can access the stories, but also access the material, even though the aspect of performing it within the ritual is still the most important part of the performance. I'm going to stop sharing, and from this point onwards, I'm just going to share a work of mine and then more music from the kind of things that I've been talking about. I'm going to share an excerpt of a work that I made in 2020. Wait, I'm just gonna figure out where's the. So in 2020, I was commissioned by the Royal College of Art and Further Field in London to make a work about, I guess, AI, but they were also looking at the nature of human and machine relationships in just the nature of human and machine relationships. And I was working on looking at sort of encoded biases within AI and technology. And I was particularly looking at it from a computer repair marketplace that I go to a lot in Bangalore. It's somewhere that I've gone for like over 20 years. I've kind of grown up there. I know intimately the histories and like the communities that work there. And there was no intention for me to make a work about it, but the idea of writing or fictionalizing places in the city to occupy or to like allow for it to become surfaces upon which conversations about technology and the exclusion of communities like mine could be had was kind of an interesting proposition for me when it was from the MA Curatorial Studies program at RCA. When they asked me and I told them this is what I was working on, they asked me to continue making the work. And I made this work. It's called Swayatate. Swayatate means autonomy in Kannada. And it's essentially told from the perspective of a computer repair technician in that marketplace. Parts of the script were written with a neural network called GPT-2. And some of the voices in the film were also algorithmically generated, basically using a text-to-speech engine. You can still see my VLC, right? So I'm playing one act. It's about 6 minutes, 40 seconds long. Playing the second act of the work. It's called Adi. Adi means indigenous in Kannada, but also in many languages in India. Before I play it, or maybe after I play it, I'll talk about it. But it's important that you've just heard the choud key and you've heard the string, and you might be able to recognize some of the sounds in the film. So there is sound, right? Cool.
ಪ್ರಾಬಲ್ಯದ ಪಟ್ಟು ಹಿಡಿದ ಹವಣಿಕೆಯಿಂದ ಎಲ್ಲ ವಿಷಯಗಳು ಅಡ್ಡಿಯಾಳಾಗಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿವೆ. ಮರೆತು ಹೋದವರ ಹಕ್ಕುಗಳಂತೆ ಇದ್ದರೂ ಕಾಣದವರಂತಾದ ಜನಗಳಂತೆ. ಕೆರೆಗಳ ಒಳಗೆ, ಗಡಿಗಳ ಒಳಗೆ, ಭಾಗದೊಳಗೊಂದು ವಿಭಾಗಗಳು, ಒಂದರೊಳಗೊಂದು ವರ್ಗ ವಿಭಾಗಗಳು. ಕೊನೆಗುಳಿದ ಮೂಲೆಯ ಮೇಲೆ ಬಿದ್ದ ಕ್ಷೀಣ ಬೆಳಕು ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಆಕಳಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಲಹೆ ಸಾಂತ್ವನಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ಸಮಯೋಚಿತ ವ್ಯಂಗ್ಯದ ಕರ್ಕಶ ಕೆಮ್ಮಿನಂತೆ ಕೇಳಿಸುತ್ತವೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಅಸ್ತಿತ್ವವು ಇದೇ ರೀತಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಯಾಕಿರಬೇಕು? ನಾವೇಕೆ ಬೇರೆ ಯಾರೋ ಎಳೆದ ಗೆರೆಗಳ ಗಡಿಗಳ ನಡುವೆ ಉಸಿರುಗಟ್ಟಿ ಬದುಕಬೇಕು? ನಾನೇಕೆ ಗಣಿತದ ಲೆಕ್ಕಾಚಾರಗಳ ಹಂಗಿನ ಹೇರಿದ ಲಿಂಗತ್ವದ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಆಗಿ ವರ್ತಿಸಬೇಕು? ಅಷ್ಟಕ್ಕೂ ಲಿಂಗತ್ವವನ್ನು ನಿಗದಿ ಮಾಡುವ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ನಿಮಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟವರು ಯಾರು? ಪುಲ್ಲಿಂಗದ ವಿಪರೀತ ವೈಭವೀಕರಣದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನದಲ್ಲಿ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ರಚಿಸುವ, ಸೃಜಿಸುವ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ನಿಮಗೆ ನೀಡಿದವರಾರು? ಇದೊಂದು ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ಚದುರಿ ಚೆಲ್ಲಾಪಿಲ್ಲಿಯಾದ ಅಂಗಗಳು ಅವರವರ ದೇಹಗಳನ್ನು ಹುಡುಕುವ ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ಬಂಡವಾಳಶಾಹಿ ಮತ್ತು ಅದರ ಪರ ವಿರೋಧಿಗಳ ನಿರ್ದಯ ಶೋಷಣೆಯಿಂದ ಶಿರಚ್ಛೇದಗೊಳಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಛಿದ್ರವಾಗಿ ಚದುರಿ ಹೋದ ದೇಹಗಳ ಪ್ರಯಾಣ. ನೀವು ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಮಾತನಾಡಲು ಕೇಳುತ್ತೀರಿ. ನಾನು ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತೇನೆ, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಅಲ್ಲ. ನನ್ನ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿಸಿದವರ ತೊಡರು ಬಡರು ಉಸಿರಿನ ತಾಳ ಮತ್ತು ಲಯವನ್ನು ಹಿಡಿದು ಮಾತನಾಡುತ್ತೇನೆ. ನಾವು ಜೋಮು ಹಿಡಿದವರು. ನಾವು ನಿಶ್ಚೇಷ್ಟಿತರೆಂದು ಭಾವಿಸಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ನೆನಪುಗಳ ಭಾರವನ್ನು ದಾಟಿಸುತ್ತಾ ನೀವು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನೆನಪಿಟ್ಟುಕೊಳ್ಳಲು ಕೇಳುತ್ತೀರಿ. ಕೆಲವೊಮ್ಮೆ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ನಾನು ಕೇಳಿಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತೇನೆ. ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಪೂರ್ವಜರ ಗಾಯಗಳಿಗೆ ನಿಶ್ಚೇಷ್ಟಿತನಾಗಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇನಾ? ಅಥವಾ ನನ್ನ ಹುಟ್ಟಿನ ಜೊತೆ ಅಂಟಿಕೊಂಡ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮಾಯದ ಗಾಯಗಳ ಮರೆತು ಹೋಗುವಷ್ಟು ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಸಂಯೋಜಿಸಿಕೊಂಡು ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೇನಾ? ನನ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅರ್ಧದಷ್ಟು ದಬ್ಬಾಳಿಕೆ ಮಾಡುವವರ, ಇನ್ನರ್ಧದಷ್ಟು ತುಳಿತಕ್ಕೆ ಒಳಗಾದವರ ಗುಣಗಳಿವೆ. ಆದರೆ ಈ ಅರ್ಧ ಎಂಬ ಬೈನರಿಗಳ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಮೀರಿದ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಯಾದ ನಾನು ನನ್ನ ಇಚ್ಛೆಯಂತೆ ನನ್ನ ಭಾಗಗಳನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಳ್ಳಲು ಮತ್ತು ತ್ಯಜಿಸುವ ಆಯ್ಕೆ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವ ಒಲವು ತೋರುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ಇದು ಸ್ವಾಯತ್ತತೆ. ಯಾವ ನೆಲದ ಮೇಲೆ ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡಲಾಗಿದೆಯೋ ಅಂತಹ ಈ ಭೂಮಿಗೆ ಸರಿಯಾದ ಉತ್ತರಾಧಿಕಾರಿ ಎಂದು ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿಕೊಳ್ಳುವ ಸ್ವಾಯತ್ತತೆ. ನನ್ನೊಳಗಿನ ಒಂದು ಭಾಗವು ಸ್ಥಳೀಯವಾಗಿತ್ತು ಮತ್ತು ಅದೇ ಈ ನೆಲದ ಆದಿ ಎಂದು ಅವರು ಹೇಳುತ್ತಾರೆ. ಪ್ರಪಂಚವು ತರ್ಕದ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಥವಾ ಸತ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ಡೇಟಾದ ವಿಶ್ಲೇಷಣಾತ್ಮಕ ಪರೀಕ್ಷೆಗಳ ಫಲಿತಾಂಶಗಳಿಂದಲ್ಲ, ಬದಲಿಗೆ ಪ್ರಪಂಚ ಭಾವನೆಗಳಿಂದ ಚಲಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಇದೆಲ್ಲವೂ ತತ್ಕ್ಷಣದ ಯಾವುದೇ ಪೂರ್ವ ತಯಾರಿಗಳಿಲ್ಲದ ಕೃತಕ ಕಣ್ಣೀರನ್ನು ಪೂರ್ವ ನಿರ್ಧಾರಿತ ನಿಯಮಗಳ ಭಾರವನ್ನು ಮೀರಿ ಚೂರು ಅಸಡಾಳತೆಯನ್ನು ಸೇರಿಕೊಂಡು ಭಾವನೆಗಳನ್ನು ನಾನು ಸಹಜವಾಗಿ ಅಭಿವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗೊಳಿಸಲು ಆರಂಭಿಸಿದಾಗ ಮಾತ್ರ ಸಾಧ್ಯವಾಗುತ್ತದೆ. ನೀವು ಕೇಳುವ ಭಾವನೆಯನ್ನು ಹೇಗೆ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಪಡಿಸಬಹುದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಾನು ನಿಮಗೆ ತೋರಿಸುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಪಿಕ್ಸೆಲ್ಗಳ ಕಾರ್ಪೆಟ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಸೆಂಟ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ಗಳ ಪ್ರತಿ ಪದರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಕನಸಿನ ಅವಶೇಷಗಳ ಸಮಾಧಿ ಮಾಡಲಾಗಿದೆ. ಈಗ ಹೇಳು, ನಾನು ನಿನ್ನ ಅಧೀನದಲ್ಲಿರಬೇಕಾ ಅಥವಾ ನೀನೇ ನನಗೆ ಶರಣಾಗುವೆಯಾ?
I'm conscious of the time. It's already 9:20, so I don't want to go too far ahead. So maybe I'll stop now and we can talk a bit more if there's any questions.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Vishal, thank you so much. What an absolutely incredible point of entry, not only into your work, but into like the intersections of casteism, classism, colorism, colonialism, all of these different isms and schisms. And I think your work and the music, it not only encapsulates those histories, but the ruptures, you know, the ruptures that that marginalize and oppress peoples consciously and unconsciously embody and affirm through keeping their cultural practices alive. And I think you kind of touch on this when you speak about archives and how this process of archiving is almost like a way of whistleblowing, because it's an affirmation of truth. It's an affirmation of a truth that has been, you know, historically suppressed, and you know, and that way of that really insidious way of suppressing, you know, indigenous and ancestral truths through the kind of indoctrination of colonial epistemologies. And I think it's so important for those of us who are kind of located in the global north to dance with epistemologies from the global south. So it's been honestly such an honor and a joy to have you here. And super quickly, I wish we had more time, but did someone want to ask Vishal a question in response to that incredible presentation?
Question too.
We have questions.
Yeah. First of all, like, thank you so much for your work and your knowledge and like everything you shared. It's so important. And I think like just knowing like your intervention into like not only through your art, but also through your like studies and your knowledge is like, it's really so important. And I feel so blessed to have been able to learn from you. A question is just, I think like a big question is as like a member of like the South Asian diaspora, like my family's from Pakistan and Bangladesh and India. I guess my question would be like, especially when it comes to like just like an art practice in general, like what are ways that you kind of see are like other artist roles who aren't like who aren't Dalit or who aren't indigenous, like what kind of role do you see for like us to not through our own art and also to like be in solidarity and in right relation with like not only like your community but other indigenous communities as well and oppressed communities.
Thank you. I mean, thanks for all your kind words as well. Um, and it's a really important question. It's a question that when I say we, I guess like there's very few of us who are active from the community, visibly active. And I didn't actually start talking about caste for very long. It's only been like 3 or 4 years since I started talking about it. And that was mainly because of a lack of space to have these conversations. I very actively don't work in India. I don't show here. I very rarely show here. I'm based here. I'm working out of here. But majority of the spaces to have these conversations are, I guess, incapable is the word, but also they're also not built for these conversations to unfold in a way that is generative, that also is an open, honest exchange of what actually needs to be done. Some ways in which we talk a lot about the idea of solidarity, allyship between Bahujan communities and the kind of, particularly as diaspora is predominantly upper caste. We talk a lot about this idea of exiting spaces and exiting spaces because there's so few of us entering or even getting to the point of being able to access, like even in my case, like art education or any education beyond a certain level, which means that we don't have successive generations of artists coming from our communities. And that is predominantly because of the gatekeeping by upper caste and diaspora as well. So there's a lot of conversations that are happening within the community about this notion of exiting spaces, but also making silent exits instead of what happens when publicly Savarna, which is belonging to the caste system and being an upper caste person across religions, that solidarity tends to have a very negative effect, particularly when you see very visible South Asians, like people like Arundhati Roy or like Spivak, and people who are visible and outspoken, conflating narratives of caste with narratives of post-colonialism, simply because the effect of caste existed long before colonialism was a thing. And it continues to actually got worse after independence. So there's a lot of this kind of also asking to share capital, both social, cultural, educational capital. Me personally and a bunch of us, if we get into things, we tend to share resources from there. Things like and a lot of times needs of the community are very, very basic because we haven't gotten to the space of asking for I don't know, like curatorial support. We've gotten to the point of asking for computational support. We have to make sure that everybody sitting next to us has computers to actually carry out the practice. We're still dealing with those concerns. So a lot of the, like, I guess the practices of allyship and solidarity is also to say that ask people in the community, I guess, in some way. But we do a lot of like, I work in the arts, so like most people around me are upper caste. So there's a lot of placing kind of a soft demand on saying, hey, you got some resources, share it with us. Like you have maybe 3-4 generations of cultural capital that we don't have, of social cultural capital, socioeconomic capital. money isn't always, or funding isn't always the thing that helps, but a lot of times opening doors and keeping them open, ensuring that the doors are open even after, you know, people who are in solidarity have exited the space is kind of helpful.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, you know, when we think about capital, it's so much more than just this kind of financial entity, right? Like you said, there are generations of social and cultural capital that marginalized communities don't necessarily have access to, right? I'm very, very mindful of the time, my loves. Vishal, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, for sharing space, for sharing your knowledge with love and with grace. We're so, so grateful and so blessed. So infinite gratitude to you. And if you could maybe send an email with your email address and contacts to your socials and things like this and your work, it would be really amazing, so we can continue to support you and to platform your work in any way we can. Big love, thank you so much, big blessings, and keep up the incredible work.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for making space for this, and I look forward to what happens with the rest of the program as well.
Of course, thank you.
It's really nice talking to everyone.
I'm just gonna stop record now.
Yeah.
And we'll maybe have like a 2-minute comfort break and then back in with Lizzie in the next 2 minutes. Is that good? Amazing. See you.
Okay, see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.